so we'll see. Yes, HipHughes
We're live.
is working.
Technical.
Okay, so we think that we're live. What are y'all seeing? Okay, so we're live.
What do you
okay,
guys
so
see? Yeah. So now how do we get that out? Let's tweet that out. All right, kids, we're coming.
Okay, yes, this is working. Okay, this is working. All right,
It's working.
So we're good. We're good. All right, so we are back online. If you go to HipHughes channel, have you embedded it on HipHughes.com yet?
Yeah, I believe so. I believe so. Yeah.
This is working. Okay, good deal. We're good. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, we are back online. Now remember, if you're studying Romulus AP Government Review, ladies and gentlemen, okay, if you're studying, I've got an app to help you study Romulus AP Government Review. Going to leave you a little shot of that. Okay, it's available at the App Store. It is also available on Google Play. Romulus AP Government Review, just $2.99. Okay, you've paid more for a cup of coffee. And so this is an app that I've created to help you just kind of diagnose what is it that you need. Okay, so Romulus AP Government Review, and I'm going to be, okay, excellent. Ask that question on the, with HipHughes and on Twitter, hashtag APGovWin. Okay, so we are about, I think we're live, and we are going to get back to the broadcast. Okay, so we are live. Sorry about the technical difficulties. Go to youtube.com/HipHughes. Okay, is it on HipHughes.com yet, Keith?
I'm triple checking.
Okay.
It's loading right now. Let's see if it's there. Please be there.
All right. McKenzo's here. All right. See you, McKenzo.
Something's there. Something's loading. So if I hit play.
Down Periscope.
It's loading. Kids, man. There it goes. All right. We are sorry. We set that up wrong. So let's start over. Hello. My name is Keith Hughes, and I'm going to be your teacher tonight. All right, guys, I'm HipHughes. You know Tom Richey. He's already introduced himself. We previously said before we figured out this video wasn't working that you can always pause us and fall back to the video arsenal. On my site, hiphughes.com, video arsenal, you can find Constitution videos. You can find all kinds of government videos. But we do want to kind of, spread out the test a little bit, figure out where we should be asking questions. And then if you use the hashtag APGovWin, we're going to answer your questions and hopefully give you some smart ways to remember some of the content. You have to remember that you don't have a lot of time for those 60 questions. It's 45 minutes, so you can't be pondering. You have to come up with a system where you either know it or you skip it and go back to it. So, knowing content is important, but spreading out and understanding that something like the Constitution, which we're going to talk about, it's important. You need to know what's in the Constitution. You need to know the Articles of Confederation. I get that, but it's only 5 to 15% of the exam. I'll run through it and then we'll throw this to Tom for a moment, but political beliefs, 10 to 20%. So yeah, we need to know ideology. We need to know that political socialization most affected by your family. It's on the exam every year, but that's only 10 to 20%. Political parties, interest group, mass media, 10 to 20%. But get this, institutions, and we had a really great question and I lost it now. I think it was Caitlin who asked about the formal and informal powers of the president when it comes to domestic and foreign policy. That's good stuff. Knowing the formal institutions and the informal institutions like bureaucracy, that's 35 to 45% of the exam. I think you've heard you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, but that's a good basket to put your eggs in. And then public policy, 5 to 15%, civil rights, 5 to 15%. And I know you know this. Free responses, you get 4, right? How many you have to do out of the 4? It's like a knock-knock joke. 4! So we want to be prepared. So Tom, what do you want to say before we start skipping through some content?
Okay, well, first of all, everybody make sure I see that the live chat appears to be lit. All right, it appears to be lit. A lot of people in live chat. But remember that Keith and I are going to be primarily looking at Twitter to take questions because the live chat goes so fast. Now, also, I want to make sure that y'all know, your books are good. This live stream is great, all that kind of stuff. But I've got an app,
Tom
Romulus
gone?
AP Government Review. What's that, Keith? Okay. Romulus AP Government Review, which is available at the App Store and Google Play at just both places, only $2.99. And this is for hundreds of questions. All right. So make sure, get a hold of that app. And we've got all kinds of other great stuff to throw at you tonight. So let's go ahead, Keith, and we will go ahead and check some Twitter and see what's going on.
I'm going to go right to a question because it's a good question. We have Sebastian Burton who asked, any good ways to remember the court cases? And I know my kids always used to freak out because when you give that court list to case out, and there's like 60 court cases, you're like, oh my God, I'm going to die. You don't need to know every single court case, but you do need to know, number one, how to categorize these court cases, and then at least a couple from each category. So the way that I always did it, here my dog's barking. Quiet dogs, was I always started off by remembering that you had the martial court, right? The martial court to me was always strength. You can't see my bulging biceps through my jacket, but that was the idea. Then I kind of could associate those martial cases, the idea of the strengthening of the federal government, right? We all understand dual federalism. Federalism is the division of power between the federal government and the states, that changes. And those court cases change it in favor of the federal government. So your court cases like Marbury versus Madison, McCulloch versus Maryland, Gibbons versus Ogden. I have videos on those. I'm not going to explain those dumb court cases. They're not dumb. They're really smart to know. But they all lead to the same idea. More power for the federal government, whether it's through implied powers in the Elastic Clause or it's through Interstate Commerce Clause or strengthen the Supremacy Clause. But that's a big concept. And then go through your court cases. And I always used to say you have to either make an accordion in your shrinking rights. So taking a court case that like Dred Scott or Plessy versus Ferguson or Korematsu, and realizing that some court cases restrict our liberty, right? The basis of the whole course is like liberty versus order, freedom versus rules. And in those cases, law and order is going to win. The rules are going to win, as opposed to where liberty wins. And we have expansion of court cases. Those are most famously your Warren court cases, like Mapp versus Ohio, Gideon versus Wainwright. You've heard these before. So I have videos. I'm sure Tom has videos too. Take a break, watch a couple videos of each of those topics, and then you should be good to go and move on to a different area. I'm not going to mention selective incorporation, which is really important, incorporating the Bill of Rights into the state governments. Tom, go.
All right, so Garrett, thanks for your question. How about those judicial branch Latin words? Okay, so let's speak a little Latin, shall we? Now, this is, again, the Romulus AP Government Review app. Very useful for this and court cases. It's got a section just on court cases with just rapid-fire questions, making sure you've got them. And so habeas corpus, it means you shall have the body. Corpus meaning body. You shall have the body. Your habeas corpus rights, these are basically your right to your body, not to be held, okay? So when you are, when you watch like the Law and Order shows and that sort of thing, you see the person that says, either charge me or let me go, that an American citizen cannot be held more than, 24, 48 hours. I've never been arrested, so I'm not sure. Maybe HipHughes can help you with that. But the thing is there's only a certain amount of time that you can be held without being charged. So other than that, you need to be charged with a crime, and you cannot just be held, without your rights. A writ of certiorari, or as my students are like, writ of certiorari, a writ of certiorari, the Supreme Court, it's really, I want to be on the Supreme Court when I grow up, because they basically get to hear like most of the cases that they pick them. Because very rarely does the Supreme Court have original jurisdiction. It's only the main source of original jurisdiction. Now, that is to hear the original case for the Supreme Court is lawsuits between the states. So South Carolina sues Tennessee over some kind of water thing or something like that. That would go to the Supreme Court. But it's mostly appellate cases. And what happens is you start at the district court, okay, the federal district court. Then you move up to the federal appellate court. And as it moves on, then if you still don't like how it turned out, you apply for a writ of certiorari. And a writ of certiorari means that the Supreme Court will hear your case. Now, nearly all requests for a writ of certiorari are denied because the Supreme Court gets so many more requests for to hear their case than, you know, cases that they actually hear. I think the Supreme Court, you know, maybe only hears about 80 cases a year and gets thousands of thousands of requests. So a writ of certiorari, if you've got a writ, that means the Supreme Court has said that we are going to hear your case. Amicus curiae. That is a friend of the court brief, okay? Amicus meaning friend, okay? So a friend of the court brief. And this is where, like, if there is a case about, this is where interest groups can, you know, express what they think. They can try to guide the court's thinking. So, you know, basically, let's say that there is a gun rights case. So the NRA would submit an amicus curiae brief, a friend of the court brief, basically containing legal arguments. Now, of course, we have common law, which is based on precedent. Now, that is another Latin word that Garrett didn't mention, but that Latin word is called stare decisis. Stare decisis, which means let the decision stand. In most cases, judges rule based on precedent. Now, there are some times, like Brown v. Board, where the Supreme Court decided to go against stare decisis, to not let the previous decision stand and to overturn precedent. But when precedent is followed, that is stare decisis, let the decision stand. Or in Russian, if you want to, Russian stare means old. So the way that I remember it is like basically old decision. And then ex post facto. Now, ex post facto is after the fact. The Constitution says that the federal government cannot make ex post facto laws. Like basically, Congress can't get together tomorrow and say that, okay, it's illegal to do live review for AP government. Then so HipHughes and Tom Richey are going to be arrested for something they did when it was legal. So as far as that is concerned, no ex post facto laws. A law cannot take effect retroactively. If someone's going to be prosecuted, then they are going to have to be prosecuted for a law that was actively on the books when the crime was committed. Okay. And yeah, let's see. Non-follower Reed Cooper. I'm just going to ignore that. All right. So as far as that, civil rights and civil liberties. Oh. Now, Keith, if you've got something at the ready, you can, you want to do that, and then I'll get to civil rights and civil liberties.
Yeah, let me throw in two real quick ideas. I know Mike Matrone, a great teacher, has shouted out that he wanted to do some basic strategies with free response questions. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but I know he's a great teacher. I'm going to give him a short answer for his kids. You can't BS these essays. It's not like other social sciences where you can talk about like the effects of history and kind of go off into the moon here. They want answers. So my biggest advice to you is cut the drama and answer the questions. If the bullet says, why did the monkey climb up the tree? You better talk about why the monkey climbed up the tree. And if it asks how it got down, you need to come up with that answer. These people grade a lot of exams. They are experts in detecting BS. So go right for the blood, right for the marrow, and answer those questions directly. Don't jump around and skip. And I would go to the essay I'm most comfortable with first and try to get the 4 or 5 on that essay, the high grade. And then if you got to spurt out something, finish all 4 though. Don't skip one. Even getting a 1 is better than getting a 0. All right, I want to talk about selective incorporation. Ryan McChargy, Ariana, I'm bad at remembering names. They probably heard me whip through it. And I do want to explain it because it's a really important concept, not only for the judicial branch, but also in terms of federalism and how the federal government, through not only the beginning period after dual federalism, but in cooperative federalism and marble cake federalism, has kind of grown and stretched itself. So basically, selective incorporation, I've always said that the Bill of Rights, we all need to realize, was written to protect us against the federal government. I'm going to keep doing this, guys, because if you don't know what federalism is, you shouldn't go to the exam. Federalism, I got to rip a little piece of paper because I have notes. Federalism is the division of power, this power that's so centric to government. It's the division of power between the federal government and the states. The idea being you divide that power, just like you divide power within the federal government, that you're protecting yourself. One of the key stones of America is limited government. There are other ones like equality and civil rights and, voting and suffrage, but one of the big ones is limited government. So selective incorporation changes that formula. Now, selective incorporation is built on the 14th Amendment, kind of the words, no state shall deny its citizens equal protection under the law. That's the concept. So what I've always said is that gave the Supreme Court, you've ever gone to the supermarket and they have that game and you put in the 50 cents and it's got a crane and it goes, the crane game, right? I've always explained that selective incorporation is like the federal government crane game. So if they want to incorporate one of those Bill of Rights concepts and tell the states, you have to do it this way, they have that with those words. So if you take a court case like Mapp versus Ohio, the dirty little old lady case, she disgusted. Old lady. But basically, they didn't have a search warrant. They went in this lady's house. They found dirty, nasty stuff. It's the 60s. They arrest her. She says, you didn't have a warrant. And the judges, the Supreme Court and the Warren Court go, you didn't have a warrant, dude. And not only did you not have a warrant, so we're going to throw that out. You're not going to use the evidence. This is the exclusionary rule. You can't use that evidence. Now, this is a state case. Mapp versus Ohio. So why is that the rule in Alabama, Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas, California, Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, Florida, Georgia, Hawaii? You get the idea. Why is it a rule everywhere? Listen to the words. Here comes the answer. Because the Supreme Court, the federal government, selectively incorporated that part of the Fourth Amendment to the states. Selective incorporation is the nationalization of some of the Bill of Rights. And you can go through them, right? Free speech and search warrants and your right to have a lawyer if you can't afford one, all that stuff, the Miranda warnings, that's selective incorporation. What do you think, Mr. Tom?
Okay, yes. Now, there are a few things here now, of course, we are getting a lot of questions. We are very happy about all of the people that are here. Now, remember that we've got, a limited amount of time, lots of questions coming in. Now, of course, followers typically get priority. That's one of the things I'm looking at. Who's following me? Who's made an investment here? If I've got to choose. Now, of course, Mimi's not following me, but I still sent Mimi a link to my video on linkage institutions. I was asked about that. Well, the thing is, there are some things that we've already got videos on. Okay, so I've already made a video on linkage institutions. HipHughes has all kinds of great videos. Now, I'm going to put out a link to an AP Gov review page that I've put together that's got all kinds of helpful videos and guides and all of that kind of stuff. Also there's the Romulus AP government app, lots of resources there to help you. But let me talk about for a second, let me go ahead and go into civil rights versus civil liberties. This is something that was actually brought up a few years ago, and I was like, oh, that's a minor distinction. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to go over this real quick. Now, first of all, this is a question of semantics. It's one of those things that colloquially we use civil rights and civil liberties about the same way. But as far as on the AP Gov exam, civil liberties are your individual rights. That is the Bill of Rights. That includes self-expression, self-defense, property rights, privacy, due process. These are things that are protections from arbitrary government action. So that's a matter of your civil liberties, okay? Now, civil rights have to do with equal protection, okay? That's the 14th Amendment. So civil liberties, think about the Bill of Rights. Civil rights, think about equal protection, the 14th Amendment. Just like, Keith was talking about selective incorporation, which is based on the incorporation of the Bill of Rights through the 14th Amendment. Now, discrimination, okay, that is when you're dealing with civil rights. So when you think about the civil rights movement, for example, this is a movement against discrimination. So discrimination based on race, gender, religion, disability, sexuality. Now, there also can be discrimination against someone on the basis of, first of all, who you are or what you're applying for. So education, employment, housing, voting. If you are not being treated the same way as other citizens, then your civil rights have been violated. Now, civil liberties, these are dealing with constitutional guarantees. I think about Madison when I think of civil liberties. When I think about civil rights, I think about Martin Luther King, equality under the law. And so the incorporation doctrine, Keith's already talked about that and how those things are kind of put together. Okay. So civil liberties versus civil rights. And so there's just something here, just a nice little graphic organizer if you want to screenshot that. If you're thinking about an interest group, which Keith hinted at this, that when it comes down to it, you want to know concepts, but you also want to know something to put with it. So if I'm thinking about court cases, I'm thinking about Brown v. Board or Regents versus Bakke, which these are all court cases that HipHughes has videos about. These are all court cases that are reviewed on the Romulus AP Government Review app. And also, when you think about interest groups, NAACP for civil rights, and for civil liberties, you might think about the ACLU, okay? And what you're really thinking about, is this a violation of individual rights, or does it involve discrimination against a group? Violations of individual rights or violations of civil liberties. If I feel that I have been discriminated against because I'm part of a group, then we're dealing with a civil rights violation. Okay, so as far as that goes, and I've already brought attention to my video on linkage institutions, so that's probably not something that's going to get a lot of coverage because I've got the video on that. So go ahead and take a look at that. Be sure to take a look at the things that we have made available to you. All right, so with that, now I've got, of course, some of these questions, we're not ignoring you. We're just going through lots of questions coming in, and we will try to get as many as we can. Now, Chloe, just real quick, Chloe, thanks for the follow. What I want to say is, like McCain-Feingold, which was passed in 2002. The Bipartisan Campaign, Reform Act. Now, this was something that was trying to cut down on the role of what's called soft money. Now, soft money, now hard money when it comes to campaigns, this is where Keith is running for whatever, okay? Keith's running for whatever office. And so I know Keith very well. And so I give $2,000 to his opponent. All right. And I say, you got to beat this guy. This guy's dangerous. Okay. So here's money straight to the campaign, and, go for it. Now, the other thing I could do is I could do hard money to the campaign, or I could contribute soft money, because see, my direct contribution to Keith's opponent's campaign is, it's limited by law. Now, I can give as much money as I want to the Republican National Committee and say that, okay, we've got to, I want this to go to this Senate race or this House race in New York, and I want you to throw this all over the airwaves, okay, about, Keith Hughes and negative ads and all of that kind of stuff. And so that is soft money. Now, this is money that is less regulated. And so McCain-Feingold was about reducing the role of soft money in politics. Now, the Supreme Court in the Citizens United case, which you could just refer to as Citizens United if you see it on something. You don't necessarily need the V or whatever. I forget what the V is, but the Citizens United case, this Citizens United was an interest group, and they're saying, look, because McCain-Feingold also said that an interest group or a party, spending money on ads, they could not mention a candidate's name within 60 days of the election. And, some people called this the Incumbent Protection Act, because it made it very difficult to, directly challenge someone on their record. Now, the Supreme Court in Citizens United, they said that it is a violation of free speech to tell someone that they, tell these soft money groups that they can't, they can't speak freely. Now, it's okay, the court said, it's okay if you put a limit on me contributing to a campaign. But if I'm making independent expenditures, okay, and I'm saying that, like, hey, I want to, it's just, Americans against, against HipHughes or something. And I want to put that out there, and I'm not coordinating with his campaign. That is my free speech right. And that's where you give rise to PACs versus super PACs. Okay. Now, political action committees, these are committees that are organized by interest groups or by corporations, like AT&T has a political action committee, the NRA, the AARP, those interest groups have political action committees. And so these groups all have political action committees. Now, they can spend a certain amount of money to help a candidate. Now, their spending limits and contribution limits, they're limited, and regular PACs can coordinate with campaigns somewhat. Now, then there is a super PAC. Now, that is a product of the Citizens United decision. And a super PAC is a form of a PAC because Citizens United said that you cannot put a limit on independent speech. And so what happens here is that these super PACs can then spend as much money as they want, as long as they don't coordinate with the campaign, as long as there are no telephone calls, emails, records of meetings. Now, what they do sometimes is like a candidate will put a high resolution picture of themselves on their website so that these super PACs can download it without having to ask for it. Also, you know, I heard about a super PAC that had some polling data, and what they did, instead of communicating it to the campaign, they put it on a Twitter account. They just started tweeting the polling data, and if somebody knew where to look, they could find it. But there was no record of direct communication between the super PAC and the campaign, because the super PAC, it's a trade-off. You get unlimited, you know, donations and spending and all that, but you can't have anything to do with the campaign. Whereas PACs can be more regulated, but they can, you know, be involved in some coordination with the campaign. So that's a little bit on PACs. Keith may or may not have anything to add to that before moving on to his next thing. Take it away, Keith.
Super PACs never coordinate with their campaigns ever. Okay. That's the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah,
right,
nobody
politics,
actually
guys.
believes that. Yeah, but there we go.
Usually it's their former campaign managers that run the super PACs. I want to do two things, right? Cut to the chase, go right for the blood, guys. We don't have a lot of time. Hit those videos. I'm telling you, that's where the magic is. I love the word gerrymandering. I love saying it. I don't love gerrymandering, but I think it's a really cool word. Just say it, gerrymander. So Martin, somebody asked about gerrymandering. And first, I kind of want to connect it to a political idea. So if you do use it, and it might be on a multiple choice, but you need some ideas for free response. And I've seen this question about gridlock a lot, right? Why is the government so gridlocked? And there's a lot of different answers, but one of them is based on the idea of gerrymandering. So what is gerrymandering? There is so many juices of answers in this explanation. But basically, first you have to know that, you know, Connecticut Compromise, go back to the beginning, the Constitutional Convention, right? The states are represented through the Senate. So everybody gets their 2 senators. That makes everybody happy. And then the people are represented through the House. So it's important that you have to know how many people live in your state. So every 10 years, this is in the Constitution, we have a census. We're like 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? Now, the 3/5 compromise, right? That disgusting compromise isn't on slavery, but how we count those slaves. So when we are in Alabama and we have 5 African Americans, we go 1, 2, 3. How would I do that? 1, 2, 3, 1. It's 3/5. I don't do math. But the idea is that as your population changes, you have to draw those congressional lines to represent those changes. So if I have a state like the state of Round. It's the state of Round. It's not even a whole state. But if I have 3 districts and I've divided my district 3 ways, 1, 2, 3, and then I have more people move into the state, now I need 4 districts. Pooey. Somebody gets to draw those lines over again. And those lines, if you look at these lines of congressional districts, they be cray-cray. They be written all crazy. And what gerrymandering is when you're the political party in power. You are the Democratic Party in the state of Rhode Island, or you're the Republican Party in the state of Alabama. And you look at that map and you go, well, I know how certain people vote. This is part of the test too, demographics, right? So I know if I have a lot of African Americans, that's probably a Democratic vote right there. And if I have a lot of evangelistic Protestants, that's probably going to be a Republican vote. So if I'm a Republican, what can I do to draw those lines so I can get the most seats in Congress? I know I'm going to win. So they draw the lines in ways that favor their party. They might centralize all of those Democratic votes into one district and then spread out their Republican votes to 3 or 4 districts. So you might have a state where it's 60-40, 60%, Republicans, 40% Democrats, they might have 10 reps and they have, 8 Republicans and 2 Democrats. That's gerrymandering. And why does that contribute to gridlock? Because when you draw safe districts, when you draw districts that are really blue, like they're all Democrats, they're really blue, then if you represent that district, you're not going to compromise. You're not going to go to Washington and go, I represent all these Democrats, but let me talk to those Republicans. That's going to get you primaried. That's going to make you lose your job. So as more districts are being gerrymandered, you have people that are much more ideologically pure in both the Republican and the Democratic Party going to Washington, and they're not working with each other. So know what gerrymandering is. I'm going to do another one really quick. Jordan Russell, this one's for you, kiddo. Iron triangles. I'm going to explain it really quick and give you one example, and then go watch the silly videos. I have a video. Tom might have a video on iron triangles, but you have to know what it is first. Iron triangle concept is that public policy is trapped in a triangle. It's an iron triangle of grit and strength that you may not break through. So if you want to change something, you want to go, you know what? We just spend too much money on missiles. We should buy less missiles and buy more food for poor people. That's a great idea. And everybody goes, yeah, let's do that. Watch the iron triangle. How are you going to pass that legislation? You have to go to Congress. And where does legislation start? It starts in the subcommittees where that would be an issue. So maybe it's the subcommittee on defense spending, right? Now, they have relationships. Those Congress people that got elected, they need money. They need Momo to be in office. So where do they raise their money? Well, if they're on the military spending committee, they probably know some people at Boeing, if you know what I mean. So they're relying on that money in order to keep their jobs. And now what do they do with that support? They support legislation that helps Boeing and feeds the bureaucracy that buys stuff from Boeing, like the Pentagon. So it's this interrelationship. Listen to it really quick. Subcommittees in Congress, bureaucracies and subcommittees in Congress, special interest groups, whether that be like the EPA, whether that be the ACLU or the NRA or Boeing, people that have a self-interest, and that bureaucracy that ends up, picking the winners and losers. That's an iron triangle. So you can use my example, use an environmental example, Keystone Pipeline and the EPA and the Sierra Club. There's lots out there, but you have to understand, what is it? Why does it make change really difficult? And label those different triangles. And you'll be playing music of AP winning. Okay, Tom, what do you think? You pick one.
All right, let's see what we've got here. Okay, so what the White House looks like in terms of staffing. Okay, so of course, remember that there is the cabinet. These are people who direct executive agencies, and then there is the White House staff. The White House staff really answers directly to the president. These people don't have to be confirmed. It's like the president has a lot more leeway to hire members of the White House staff. And so then, of course, there are your, executive departments and all of that kind of stuff. As far as that goes. All right, but as far as that, but knowing the difference between cabinet and the White House staff, I think is something that is important. Okay, as far as that goes, Madison, the different acts. What acts are we talking about? Okay, there are a lot of acts. Okay, now as far as the compelling state interest test, one of the things here is that anytime that the government basically steps in and says, you as an individual are not going to be able to exercise a right. There are a couple of things here, okay, that the Supreme Court subjects this to what's called strict scrutiny, okay? So basically the government has to show that there is an actual compelling state interest. Also if the government's going to say that we're not going to release something, we're going to say that there is executive privilege, such as the Nixon administration tried to do, then you're going to run into, it's like, is there really a compelling state interest? Now, a lot of times, national security is when the executive branch, if the executive branch can make a legitimate national security argument, that is going to be the best thing to do if they can get away with that. But basically, if anybody's rights are going to be curtailed, there must be some sort of compelling state interest. You can't just say, well, we just don't want this to happen. That everything is going to be placed under strict scrutiny. Okay, so as far as that goes, yes, Reed, very happy. I tell you, this guy is a character. All right. Now, does Congress draw the lines or the Supreme Court do it after the Baker versus Carr decision? Now, as far as this goes, that, you know, what we're dealing with here are the state legislatures, okay? The state legislatures draw the lines. This goes back to federalism. Keith was talking about this division of power between the federal government and state governments, all right? So this division of power between the two governments. And as far as that goes, the state legislature draws the line. Now, Baker versus Carr said, you know, basically the state was trying to say this is only a political question. This is not the court's business. Now, Baker says that the courts can get involved, but the courts don't necessarily draw the lines. Remember that courts are generally arbiters, but, you know, they can say that these lines aren't good, these aren't good, but the federal government isn't going, you know, Congress isn't going to draw lines because that would get in the way of federalism and, you know, of course, you know, just Congress determining its own powers and such. So that is a state power, but a state, you know, state congressional districts, the way that they're drawn, that can be challenged in court. Now, hopefully, I may give out some free app codes in a little bit, so we're going to see what's, you know, if I've got any of those available. But for right now, let's go to Keith.
Caitlin Gardner, yes, you are encouraged to use modern politics. She asked, can we use examples from Obama and Trump? You're highly encouraged. It's the concepts and how you apply them. They want modern. They don't love when you write about old dead elections from the 1800s. Matthew asked about elections, and I'm not going to go through all of the elections. I'll give you a couple of years, and if you actually go to the Video Arsenal, I have an election playlist. I've done every single election except for 2016. I just can't bring myself to do it. Let's not get into that with me and Mr. Richey right now. But if I had to pick two, I cut my pinky off, brother. If I had to pick two, I would probably pick, you know, I don't want to go back too far, but 1932 is a huge, huge kind of realignment year. We'll talk about what that means. 1980 is a great year for realignment as well, kind of the Reagan Revolution. But now that I'm saying realignment, I want to explain it to you. There's basically been 5 kind of party systems. We all need to know two-party system. It's kind of always been that way. That kind of comes out of life of the anti-feds and the feds at the Constitutional Convention. So the Federalist kind of represents, of course, the feds, Washington and Hamilton. And then we have our anti-fed boys like Thomas Jefferson, and eventually Madison and such, becoming the Democratic Republican Party. So the Democratic Republicans versus the Federalists, the Democratic Republicans, you know, run the gauntlet from 1800 to 1824. The Democratic Republicans split, and the party of Andrew Jackson is kind of the second party system, 1824 to 1828 to 1860. And then we have the third party system, was the dominance of the Republican Party. And that's from Abraham Lincoln until really 1932 with FDR. So I'm going to use this as an example, a really easy one of you understanding de-alignment and realignment. So de-alignment is when you start looking at your party and you go, I don't know if I want to hang out with you anymore. You're kind of, can I say pissing me off? I just did. You're kind of pissing me off. So for instance, African Americans, right? African Americans are born in the Republican Party, right? Republican Party, party of Lincoln, the party of the Union, the Civil War, and even Teddy Roosevelt, you know, very favorable in terms of African Americans. They're voting for Republicans. But something occurs, you know, from 1910, 1920 into the 1930s, where African Americans and other demographics that were Republicans, like farmers and such, are looking at the Republican Party and they're going, what have you done for me lately? What have you done for me lately? Because your policies don't represent my interest anymore. So you de-align. De-align is when you kind of pop off the baby. When you pop off something, you go, pop. I don't want to be part of the Republican Party. I de-align. And then you're hanging out there waiting for another party to serve you dinner. And sometimes third parties will do that. The Populist Party kind of did that, reaching out to disenfranchised, you know, people in maybe the Republican Party. But eventually you realign. See, I said de-align. You knew I was going to say realign with the with the Democratic Party in 1932. That's a New Deal coalition where he's aligning all these voters that weren't really part of the Democratic Party. So you have African Americans from Detroit that are in the same party as Southerners from Alabama who are practicing Jim Crow. That's an amazing feat that FDR pulled off. And that coalition sticks together for a very long time until, you know, we could talk about the silent majority and kind of the Southern strategy. I have a video on that. But eventually there are going to be kind of Southerners who eventually, during the Civil Rights era and kind of onward from there, who don't want to be part of the Democratic Party. What have you done for me lately? Again, reaches out and he, you know, has policies that he said are going to help you. They realign with the Republican Party. So watch the 1932 election, watch the 1980 election. There's other great elections. I mean, you could do 2000, 1992, Bill Clinton, New Democrat. There's really great stuff in there. But at least know the concept of de-alignment and realignment and how that kind of plays its part in different elections. This because Marlene's asked like 5 times. Bicameral legislature. Sometimes we just kind of assume things, we talk really fast. But please understand, we have a 2-house Congress. Bi means 2, cameral is house. So when we formulated our government, we talked about limited government before, they didn't want us passing lots of laws. So they made it like a mousetrap game. Very difficult, very difficult. I mean, you might say, oh, they pass a law, then the president can sign it, and then the Supreme Court reviews it. Supreme Court doesn't even really get to review it in the original Constitution. That's unwritten Constitution, Marbury versus Madison. But getting it through the House, because you have a House of Representatives that's representing the people, and then it has to go through the Senate as well, very difficult. So, you know, Caitlin wanted to use a current example about how this might cause gridlock. Look at the health reform going through the House now. They're having such a hard time putting their coalition together. And if it does go through, where's it going to go, kids? It's going to go to the Senate. And if the Senate changes one word, they're like, we don't like 3, we want 4. Then it has to go to conference committee where they have to come together and iron out a deal. This makes it much harder to pass legislation, which is really good if you're a big fan of limited government. But if you're somebody who believes in an active government, you want to solve problems, you're probably going to be grinding your teeth many nights going to sleep because it's set up for gridlock. Bicameral legislature created by the Great Compromise or the Connecticut Compromise, which creates a House of Representation based on population, and every state gets 2 senators. How about that, kids? All right, Tom, go.
All right, a few topics. First of all, in the chat, we've got a lot of asking about the bully pulpit. Now, the bully pulpit, this is a Teddy Roosevelt term that describes basically the president is able to message more effectively than Congress, because when it comes down to it, the president, when they talk, like anytime President Trump tweets, it's like, there it is. Now, when Paul Ryan or congressman tweet, we don't see that. Now, HipHughes is holding a bat of some sort.
Just holding the bat.
Okay. All right. I thought he had some explanation of the bully pulpit, but basically,
Teddy Roosevelt, so I like my bat.
Yeah, the big stick. Got it. He's got a big stick there. All right. So as far as that goes, the president, when you think about like the policy agenda and the things that are being talked about, it's like the president really gets to exercise a lot more personal influence than Congress, which is made up of 535 people. So it's very difficult for Congress to message, to say like, this is our agenda, whereas the president is able to just say on a whim, this is my agenda, as far as that goes. And so now, can I explain the checks on the judicial branch? Lots of questions about checks and balances. Now, the judicial branch, of course, they, of course, Hamilton said in the Federalist Papers that the judicial branch would be like the least powerful. You don't have to worry about the judicial branch. Of course, Hamilton was a con man, and most of the stuff he wrote was insincere. He was hoping probably the judicial branch would be powerful because that's a great way for government power to increase. But when it comes down to it, judges, they serve for life. Okay, now they can be impeached. but it is very difficult to impeach judges. The Jeffersonians impeached a few. There have been a few federal judges that have been removed from office by the impeachment process, but I think like maybe, I mean, just a very small amount, and never a Supreme Court justice. Zero Supreme Court justices have been removed by that process. Now, the thing is, though, impeachment does remain a check, because some historians have noted that while the Jeffersonians may have been unsuccessful in impeaching, these Federalist judges, it still served notice that if you go too far from the mainstream or too far from the party in power, we will do something to rein you in. So there's a little bit of inherent restraint not wanting to be impeached. Also, for a judge to be on the Supreme Court or on any federal court, they have to be, first of all, nominated by the president, and then they have to be confirmed by the Senate, and they go through a pretty rigorous confirmation process. So that is a check. Now, also, Congress has the power to amend the Constitution. So, for example, when you look at Dred Scott, that said that people of African descent cannot be U.S. citizens. Well, Congress responded by putting out the 14th Amendment, saying that all people born in the United States and subject to the laws thereof are citizens of the United States and subject to equal protection of laws. Now, what this did is this court decision overruled Dred Scott. And so they can do that. They can change that. Also, Congress can, in some cases, change the law. They can also decide, well, you know what? How about we want more people on the federal bench? Congress basically all the Constitution says is that there will be a Supreme Court. And so then Congress gets to decide how many justices are on the Supreme Court. They get to decide there will be this many federal courts. Those federal courts will have this many judges. There will be this many judicial circuits. And so Congress really does have a lot of leeway on that. But then again, the judicial branch, its power is largely unchecked. Okay. Now, just one more reminder for you to buy my app while I look at, this. Now, we've got Lucy Baxter. Okay, let me talk to Lucy Baxter. Thank you for the follow. A sock enthusiast. All right, excellent. And so as far as that, Lucy, you've asked the difference between categorical and block grants. Okay, now a categorical grant is a more specific grant. Okay, so this is the sort of thing that this is money that has to go to this. Okay, so a categorical grant would be, for example, like money that is to build high schools. Okay, so for the construction of high schools. And so the state has to use that money for the construction of high schools. So to do that. Now, as far as that goes, a block grant is, and I think about a block, it's just like here, bam, here you go. And so a block grant is much more flexible. This is when the federal government says, okay, so here is an amount of money and you have to spend it on education. Okay, so there you go. Like, you have to spend this on education, you have to spend this on welfare, or, for transportation, you have to spend this on, an extension to I-95. Or you just have to spend this on highways. That would be a block grant. So those are the ways that the federal government, the primary two means as far as things there. All right. And then let's see, congressional committees. Shout out to Dr. Cardos. Okay. Thank you. We've got, do we have that written down?
Written down.
It's off camera.
For you, Dr. Cardos.
I don't see it. Do we, okay, it's there. It's there. Dr. Cardos. Okay, thank you.
Not lying.
Thank you, Cedric. Now, congressional committees, might be a good thing to go over, and also like committee assignments. Okay, so what I'm going to do here, I'm going to go over U.S. Senate committee. We're going to look up U.S. Senate committees. I think sometimes it's good having a few of those things here. All right, so let me go ahead and share my screen with you real quick. And just so you can see a couple of these committees, I'm going to point out the more important committees, okay? So now there are standing committees. Now, standing committees, those are committees that are always like basically in the rules of the chamber, the Senate or the House. Those committees are always there. Now, there are other like select committees where they will say like, okay, this is a committee on, something or other. Okay, this is something like a special committee on aging or something like that. There are some joint committees. Now, joint committees are committees that go between the Senate and the House. Okay, so as far as the U.S. Senate committee, agriculture, nutrition, and forestry. Okay, now also appropriations. Now, appropriations, that has to do with what you're going to do as far as how are we going to budget money. Okay, so appropriations. Now, the House, calls this the House Budget Committee. So as far as we go here, U.S. House committees. Okay, so we've got here the House Budget Committee. So in some cases, the House of Representatives is going like they don't necessarily have to call them the same thing. So you've got the House Budget Committee, and then over in the Senate, you've got the Senate Appropriations Committee. Okay, and then you've got the Armed Services Committee, banking. You've got, let's see. So then you've got Finance Committee, Foreign Relations Committee. Okay, now as far as that goes, let's take a quick look at something. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look up, Tom Cotton. Okay, Tom Cotton from Arkansas. Now, if we look at Tom Cotton, how does somebody get assigned to a committee? Okay, so let's see as far as his committee assignments. Now, he is a lawyer and he's been on the military. So as far as committees, okay, committee assignments. Now, he's been on there relatively recently. So financial services and foreign affairs. Now, they put him on foreign affairs because he is a veteran. Now, if we go to Chuck Grassley, okay, so Chuck Grassley, so if we look up Charles Grassley, he's been basically serving for my entire life, I think, 1981, almost as long as I've been alive. Now, as far as his committee assignments, he's got seniority. The three things that they're going to look at are like, they're going to look at seniority. They're also going to look at are there any areas of special expertise that you have? Now, the third thing will be your state. Okay, so Charles Grassley is from Iowa. Okay, so if we look at his committee assignments, we see here that he is on the committee on agriculture. Okay, so agriculture, that's, Iowa's basically an agriculture state. The committee on the judiciary. Now, the judiciary committee, that's where you see all the judiciary, confirmations, and that is a big deal. Now, if we go to Joni Ernst, who is serving with him, but she is relatively new. Now, her committee assignments, we see agriculture, okay, because she's from Iowa. Also, we see that there's the Committee on Armed Services because she is a veteran. The Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs. So there are some committees, though, like when you look at the Judiciary Committee, that's something Joni Ernst and Tom Cotton aren't going to be on the Judiciary Committee. Those are people like Chuck Grassley. So that's how you get on these things. So, it is important to kind of know how that committee system works, and especially in the Senate, a big emphasis on seniority. Okay, so Keith, do you have anything to add when it comes to the specific committees and anything they want to go into on that?
The two that are on the exam most often are the Ways and Means Committee in the House, because excuse me, that's the money, that's the committee that spends the MOMO. All tax and finance and revenue goes through the House Ways and Means Committee. So that's on the test a lot. And the other standing committee in the House is the Rules Committee, because that's the committee that sets up the rules for how legislation gets on the floor. So those are the two most powerful committees. So if you don't remember anything, remember the Rules Committee in the House and the House Ways and the Ways and Means Committee are really important for how the House functions and how the House spends money. We need to spend a couple of minutes at least defining bureaucracies. Everybody's like, oh no, bureaucracies are giving you heartache. Well, they give everybody heartache, but they're necessary entities. So I'd like to at least explain the basics of what they are, give you a couple of examples. But A bureaucracy is sometimes seen as like the fourth agency or institution of government, the fourth branch of government, because it is so powerful. And in many cases, it outlasts people that go through the legislative and the executive. Now, lifetime appointments for judicial, so they get to stay a very long time. But if you're a bureaucrat and you work in the DEA or the Pentagon or the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, or Social Security Administration, these kinds of agencies that help us define law and enforce law. And they're really weird because they're not like complete separate entities. Bureaucracies are created by the hand of Congress, right? The hand that feeds them. But once they are created, they're in a sense in charge of executing the public policies. And they're on that iron triangle for a reason, because they're very powerful in how they write rules for implementing policies and how they enforce rules for policies. Congress and the president can't micromanage everything. So bureaucratic institutions, well, they get negatives for creating conflict, and bureaucracies, red tape, and they slow up things. And you find out the Pentagon spent $400 for a screwdriver, and you're like, what's going on? We live in a very large country, and these bureaucracies deal with extraordinary large amounts of money and very minute details of how that money is spent and where it goes. Now, back to that iron triangle, if you take a bureaucracy like the Drug Enforcement Agency, the DEA, what are they in the business of doing? What do they do? How do they survive? Right? They survive by arresting drug dealers and drug peoples, right? That's how they get their revenue. That's how they keep themselves on the map. So if somebody is going to Congress and saying, I have an idea, let's decriminalize some types of drugs or something like that, that bureaucratic group, and this is one of the big indicators of bureaucracy, is only interested mostly in self-preservation. They're not interested in what's the best remedy or how do we fix a problem. They want to make sure they're funded and that they're relevant and that they're going to be around next year. So bureaucracies fall in and out of favor with administrations. You take, the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. That's probably going to take a 20 or 30% whack this year because the Republican Party has a different view in terms of the federal government's role in regulation. But that actual bureaucracy, the EPA, they're not going to fire everyone. They still have lots of things to do and to keep themselves busy testing water in the air and enforcing and encoding those rules that are supposed to keep us safe. So what is a bureaucracy? A very powerful entity that's mixed up in both branches. Judicial branches will rule whether or not they have gone far in instituting a rule. Congress funds them. The president, in many cases, picks their cabinet, the leaders of these bureaucracies. So they're intercorrelated from all of the branches, but they have a mission of self-survival, and that sometimes can get in the way of change. So make sure you know what a bureaucracy is. Make sure you know the House and Ways and Means Committee and the Rules Committee, and make sure you know that we love you. Tom, you see any other questions you want to hit? Tom's gone. I'm going to keep talking. All right. Basic stuff for the beginning of the year. Please know the very basic kind of forms or ideologies of government. This idea of pluralism, right? I call that the red, white, and blue theory of government, that everybody's got a different idea. And we all come together and we chat it out. And then we compromise and we pass good public policy for the good of all Americans. That's pluralism. It rests on the idea of us being a republic, a representative democracy. Out of many come one. But there are other theories as well, like hyperpluralism, which means there are so many voices that it drowns out sanity. It causes gridlock because everybody's only interested in kind of spouting out what they want. And then we have elite theory. Elite theory is based on the idea that, private property is really important and forms a lot of where power comes from. So somebody who believed in that, oh my God, what is that? Would believe in a form of government called an oligarchy. This guy right here looks like an oligarch. Tom, what are you doing?
Did somebody mention dark money? All right, somebody asked about dark money. All right, dark money, these are 501c3 nonprofit organizations that are not required to disclose their donors. their donors. Did not go. I think Wally is still there. They are not required to disclose their donors. Their donors are in the dark. You don't know exactly where the money is coming from.
All right, gosh, it's hot in that mask, okay? But, Keith and I are doing an A-Push review in a couple days. That's going to be on Thursday night. Now, of course, I'm going to be broadcasting with Paul Sargent tomorrow, so we're going to be doing some more AP government review tomorrow, so y'all be ready for that. But yeah, so these are these nonprofit political organizations that are not required to disclose their donors, and that's why their money is dark. Okay, so that's dark money. Basically, these organizations that don't have to give away their donor list for whatever reason. All right, Keith, thought that I'd go ahead and answer that because we had that coming from a lot of people.
I want to talk a little bit about the role of the Supreme Court, not too much because it's not huge on the exam, but as an institution power, it is. Dale asked, why would the Supreme Court be insulated from public opinion? Important question. They are insulated from public opinion. They have lifetime jobs. And the reason for that is that they are supposed to follow the Constitution and not worry about getting reelected. The idea of, big ideas in government, limited government is one, and also that we have majority and minority rights. So we can't let the majority vote out the rights of the minority. And that's why the Supreme Court doesn't have to face that public opinion test, because you wouldn't want that. You wouldn't want judges going in 1954 in Brown versus Board of Ed and saying, I really think that we should get rid of this separate is equal business, but man, I got an election next year down in Alabama. That's why you don't want that. So that's why they don't have to face that. Now, Federalist papers that are important to know, and we have videos on these, so we won't talk a lot about it, but I'd pick like 2 Federalist papers, at least one. Everybody should know Fed 10. Like, if you don't know Fed 10, you should stay home and play 6, son. It ain't going to work out. So I have a really good video on Fed 10. You can find that in my government list. But understanding the idea that first the Federalist papers were written not of what is the Constitution, but why the Constitution. The theories, some of the most important governmental theory papers that were ever written. And what Madison understood in Fed 10. Is it Hamilton? I'm so confused. Hamilton, right?
Madison wrote Fed 10. You're good.
That's all. What Madison understood was that factions were really the most dangerous thing in a republic. And he understood that you could either do one of 2 things with factions. Factions are people seem to, group themselves together. And he understood that the biggest grouping were really those with and those without. That property was one of the biggest defining factors of what a faction was. So when Madison wrote Fed 10, he wasn't worried about poor people. He was worried about the rights of property owners because they were a minority. So basically he's saying you can do one of 2 things. You can get rid of the cause of factions, and that's being like a communist. That's like saying, okay, no private property, then there's no cause of faction, and we can all live in Narnia, right? Or you could control the effects of factions. And that's why in Fed 10, he argues for a large republic. So factions can be diluted across this large republic, that we can elect good men of faith, good women later in our history, and that we can control the effects of factions. So please know Fed 10, that's a really important one. I want to say 47. I think it's 47 that's checks and balances, right? But that's another important one.
Now, 51 is on there a lot, which also, Madison wrote several on checks and balances, but I think like 51 would be as far as, and of course, we're getting some questions about checks and balances, Keith. So if you might, mention just a few of the main checks and balances, especially as it regards the bureaucracy.
Yeah, well, let me do a couple, and then let you do a couple, because you need some examples from all 3 ranges in terms of checks and balances. Now, the Supreme Court is always going to be a check and balance on all of the other branches and informal branches. So, for instance, if the EPA institutes a rule where they're going to start, mandating something as a poison or something to be regulated, you could sue the EPA. You can go to the Supreme Court. Judicial review can operate as a check and balance on bureaucratic institutions, on executive actions. We've seen this with the Trump administration, not at the Supreme Court level, but in the federal court level as well. And of course, you also have, congressional legislation that's going to have to pass test with the Supreme Court as well. So sink your teeth into the Supreme Court as a huge vehicle of checks and balances, but always be willing to put out there in the first chapter that it's an informal check and balance in the sense that it comes from the Supreme Court decision Marbury versus Madison. That's really important. And then go for the low-hanging fruit. There's just some easy checks and balances that you can use on the exam, whether it be treaty powers that have to go in front of the Senate with a 2/3 approval. So talking about even something like the 14 points or the League of Nations Treaty of Versailles can work out for you. Of course, veto power and overriding a veto, really important as well. And then somebody asked a great question, I don't know who it was, about the line item veto and whether that was constitutional. And I'll say the vocab word, but you want to make sure you have the contract with America down as a vocabulary word. In the mid-90s, as a reaction to Clinton's presidency in 92, Newt Gingrich and a lot of Republicans organized themselves with this contract with America to put forth Republican ideas. One of them was the line item veto. They also had things in there like welfare to work and block grants, going back to more of a state-focused kind of federalism role. But just because you pass that legislation doesn't mean that it's going to be
Okay, it looks like Keith is frozen. We're going to see if I'm still going, okay? But as far as that is concerned, somebody asked about foreign policy, okay? So a few things about foreign policy that I think would be important to note would be that, first of all, the president typically has more power over foreign policy than domestic policy. Now, there's no better case of that than President Trump's first 100 days. The executive orders, about the travel ban didn't go so well. The healthcare reform did not go so well. I'm really struggling to think of a single, massive, legislative achievement in the first 100 days. But in 1 week's time, he has challenged North Korea. He has, bombed Syria. He has bombed Afghanistan. That basically the president has a hard time, getting his own party to pass a bill in this country, but then has a very easy time just like, okay, I'm gonna drop a bomb. Now, as far as, presidential deployments and stuff like that, they're governed by the War Powers Resolution or the War Powers Act, which was passed by Congress and said that the president must notify Congress within 48 hours of deploying any troops, okay, before deploying any troops. And then after 60 days, Congress must authorize any continued military involvement. So the president's basically, if he informs Congress, he's got about a 60-day blank check. Which is very generous of Congress, because remember, Congress has the power to declare war. The president is commander in chief, and Congress has the power to declare war. All right, so I don't know. Let's see if I'm even going right now, if that's even happening. Okay, so it looks like I am here. Wow, the chat is lit. Hopefully, y'all are taking a moment to buy my app, Romulus AP Government Review. Just a little $2.99 purchase. Get on that, people, because that's $2.99 is nothing compared to your exam. Lots of good questions, and you can get, as far as that goes. All right. So, yes, as far as that goes, thank you. Thank you, Natalie and Garrett and all of you folks. So happy to see y'all doing your thing. All right. So as far as that goes, the FRQ section, what should we expect? What is your opinion on what we might see? Okay. So yes, excellent. Wait. Are we just on the same page here? The War Powers Act, like I mentioned that, and Cedric tweets about it. I tell you what, Cedric, my man. All right. So Matthew is asking here in regards to the FRQ section, what should you expect? Now, the thing is that they're going to randomly pick 4 topics. All right. So trying to figure out how to game the exam. Not so sure about that. Be prepared for everything. Now, there are a few things on the multiple choice. I think that that's more predictable. All right. That as far as there's likely going to be a Marshall court case, you're going to see probably either Dred Scott or Plessy v. Ferguson or Brown v. Board. You're going to see something about, about the Federalist Papers, most likely from Federalist 10 or Federalist 51. And what you're going to see here now, when you're looking at answers for the Federalist Papers, remember that the writers of the Federalist, Madison, Hamilton, and Jay, they are defending against the charges of the Anti-Federalists. So if you understand, the Federalists want a larger central government. They believe that, the government needs the power over commerce. They're basically arguing that the Constitution is not dangerous. All right. And so Madison is saying, a large republic, not a bad thing. Whereas the Anti-Federalists said, the Roman Republic got large and then it fell apart and turned into an empire. And that's what the Constitution is going to do. And it looks like our friend HipHughes is back. Our friend HipHughes is back. Awesome. And remember, as far as this, all of this go, just to get a straight to the point answer, all All right. So yeah. Okay. So as far as that goes, oh, nice. Okay. So Sebastian, you have got Romulus U.S. history and U.S. government. Thank you so much for buying my apps and all of that good stuff. Okay, I think that's going to be a good investment for you. Now, remember, I'm going to be broadcasting with Paul Sargent tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. So be sure to follow me on Twitter. I've got, I'm going to show you where to get to that. Okay, so I'm going to put all the links and all that there. Keith and I did this tonight because Keith's teaching a class tomorrow, but I will be doing a broadcast with Paul Sargent tomorrow night. So stay tuned on Twitter for information about that broadcast. Now, also Snapchat, Tom Richey SC, Instagram as well. At Tom Richey, I'll put stuff up there. Okay, so if you want to know what's happening, make sure you're following me on social media, and I'll be giving all the details about that, where to find the hangout and everything. Now, Keith has got some great stuff here. Okay, Keith, take it away.
So what I wanted to show you guys was on the website, this is the political science section here. So if I just open that right there, where are you going? There we go. So you should see that now, right? Yeah. So lots of great videos in here, and you can see some of the vocabulary that you've talked about in class. Supreme Court jive, there's Citizens United. But a lot of people are asking about this process, how a bill becomes a law. I'm going to go over that really quickly, but recommend that you do watch that video. And then you can see there's a whole bunch of other videos down below here, Fed paper videos, liberal, libertarian, conservative, socialist, all of these words that you've seen all year. So you still have, a couple days. So watch some videos, kids. It'll do you good. So I'm going to try and pop back on your window here. There we are. So I'm not going to take you through every single step other than to tell you it's not as simple as the song in Schoolhouse Rocks. Basically, anybody can submit a bill in Congress that's a member of Congress. And a lot of these bills, though, actually get written outside of Congress. So I can write a bill. I have an idea. Every presidential candidate should take the AP government exam and have their results released to Congress. I can write that piece of legislation, but I have to give it to my representative. I'd have to go to Brian Higgins, who represents Buffalo, where I'm from, and he'd have to put it in the hopper. How's that for a cool vocabulary word? They actually have a little thing. It's called the hopper. They put the bill in there. And then in the House, where most bills first get introduced, especially revenues, they have to be introduced in the House. That's part of Constitutional Article 1, Section 8, listing all of the delegated powers. But then it's going to get buried in one of those committees. Not even one of those committees. Remember, we were like, oh, the House and Ways and Means and Rules Committee. There's subcommittees. So it's going to go down all of these levels, and then it's going to get changed. And most bills, 99%, probably maybe less than that, but 90% more, never see the light of day. But if they do, they're going to get significantly changed and kind of moved up. And in the House, they have to go through the Rules Committee to get on the floor. Once they get on the floor for a vote, it's going to be going over to the Senate, where it's probably going to undergo changes. Then it's going to go to what's called the Conference Committee, where the House and the Senate have to come together and they have to iron out their differences and change it in order to get the same piece of proposed legislation passed in the House and the Senate. Then it goes to the president. where the president can either sign that piece of legislation, veto that legislation, or he can do what's called a pocket veto, where he does nothing, and then it kind of becomes vetoed after 30 days. Once it's vetoed, it goes back to Congress, where if it is overruled with a 2/3 majority in the House and the Senate, it can become law. So that's really important to understand the very, very basic concept. But the bigger idea that it's difficult for a reason. It's difficult because the founders wanted to make a system where government had a hard time making laws over people, because every time you make a law, it's taking a little bit of somebody's liberty away. So striking that balance, that's the magic sauce of the Constitution. I am going to throw out a little bit about the Articles of Confederation because it is on the multiple choice. And a couple people have kind of brought it up, but understanding that the Articles of Confederation, our first Constitution from 1776 to 1787, was a form of federalism. Federalism is the division of power between the feds and the states. I've always done this with paper, so I'll grab a little piece of paper, which represents power, because for many years we all understand that as colonial subjects of Great Britain, we got beat by the power, right? Great Britain is mercantilizing us in this triangular trade business and taking away our liberty, taxing us and such without representation. So eventually, what do? Bang! Revolutionary War, baby. Look at all the power. I got the power. And the idea is that when we made the Articles of Confederation and we divided the power, we divided it like this. Federalism under the Articles of Confederation is the division of power between the federal government and the states. That's not the way it is today. But you can understand why the federal government, the central government under the Articles of Confederation had so little power, because we were just dating a domestic abuser. He was terrible. We don't want to go out with an abusive person again. We want to make sure that the federal government can't do that. So when you look at the Articles of Confederation, you look at the lacking of having a president, no judicial branch, no power to tax, no power to gather a national army or to coin money or really to regulate interstate commerce. It's almost like we're 13 little countries. And that makes it impossible to do big things. And you have people like Hamilton that want to do big things. They want a national bank. They want a central government. So Shays' Rebellion, of course, you know this already. U.S. History 101 is kind of the trigger that allows for the Articles of Confederation to be thrown out. And remember, that had to be thrown out. To amend the Articles of Confederation, you needed all 13 states to agree. And Rhode Island was like, I ain't even going to talk about it. I'm not even going to look at you. What if I don't look at you? You can't change it if I don't look at you. I'll look over here. And then everybody else was like, screw it. We're just going to start over. That's the Constitutional Convention, where, of course, federalism becomes more of a balanced dual federalism. You've seen the Venn diagram. Federalism is the division of power between the feds and the states. And then as we go through American history, we see these pieces of paper change as the feds grow in power and the states, for most of the 19th and 20th century, are going to shrink in power. And of course, that's changing even as we talk about it today. So federalism, the Articles of Confederation, a little bit about how laws are made and such. What say you, Mr. Richey? I think I could do another half hour. I don't know about you.
All right. You know, I don't mind going over that a little bit. Okay. So let's see. Now, as far as this goes, okay, we've got, okay, interesting question from Sophia. Okay, not following. Let's move on to somebody who is. Let's see. As far as what we go here, let's see. Brando. Okay, Brando. What powers does Congress have that isn't part of the lawmaking process? Now, one of the thing that I would say that I've seen this come up on exams before is the oversight power. Okay, now oversight is basically, this is one of those checks, okay, because somebody needs to keep an eye on the executive. So it's almost like oversight is looking over the executive's shoulder, and the House and Senate both have an oversight committee. And so these oversight committees, what they have the power to do, they can subpoena any of the cabinet officials, any kind of executive branch officials, and they will ask them questions. They can perform investigations. There was something a few years ago, Fast and Furious, where they were like, okay, you know what, it'd be a good idea to get some guns and trace the serial numbers, and we're going to just kind of send those guns over the Mexican cartels, and we're going to see where those guns end up. All right, just kind of an experiment. Well, the thing is, that's probably not the best idea in the world. And so the oversight committee, now, of course, oversight committees tend to be most vibrant when you have that the House or the Senate is controlled not by the president's party, because that's when they're really using this oversight power. Oftentimes it's used politically. Keith is nodding his head over there. I mean, you've got the committee on Benghazi, this sort of thing. So it's the investigative powers that are beyond lawmaking. You've got this oversight power. I think that is the most important non-legislative power that Congress has. Keith, can you think of anything else that might address that?
In terms of oversight?
In terms of any power of Congress beyond lawmaking?
Well, obviously there's impeachment power. That's really important. Having the ability to remove a sitting president. Make sure that we also know that there's a difference between impeachment and removal. I've had for years people, where I go, President Clinton, was impeached. And they go, yeah, but no, he wasn't. He wasn't impeached. He was still in office. No, he was impeached. Impeachment means you're bringing charges. The House of Representatives does that with a simple majority. So, for instance, if the House of Representatives flipped in the midterm elections and Democrats took over and they wanted to impeach President Trump for violating the emolument clause, I have a video on that. You can't profit off the presidency. And there are different interpretations, but they could probably legitimately try it and impeach him on that. You still have to go to the Senate. And that's where, the genius of the Constitution comes into play. You need a trial, right? But you need the Senate to vote 2/3 majority to.
Okay, so it looks like we lost Keith there. Wow, what a screenshot there. So as far as that goes, ladies and gentlemen, that the Senate, a 2/3 majority of the Senate has to vote in favor of removing the president from office, and that has never happened. 2 presidents have been impeached, which largely for political reasons by the other party. 0 presidents have ever been removed from office, and 1 president has resigned under threat of impeachment. That was, of course, Richard Nixon. Now, as far as that goes, my man Cedric, all right, now he has got some things going on here. And yeah, let's hit that guy up with a follow. I tell you, he's been great tonight. And so as far as that, voter demographics, okay? So demographics, this is the thing, that the AP government exam has charts and graphs and stuff. But what I've always told students when I've taught AP government is your goal when you're taking the exam is not to have to look at the charts and graphs, okay? Or just be able to glance at it and know what that is. So as far as that is, that is concerned, you've got, all of the stuff on the charts and graphs is true. So when you know things like, for example, women are more likely to vote Democratic than men. Now, not a ton more likely necessarily, but there is, across demographics, as far as, 53% of white women voted for Donald Trump in this past election. A significantly higher portion of white men voted for Donald Trump in this election. Now, of African Americans who, voted for Donald Trump, you are talking. Now, what's interesting is with white voters, the lower the education level, the more likely they were to vote for Donald Trump. But with non-white voters, then the higher the education level, the more likely they were to vote for Donald Trump, which I think that goes into typically more higher educated minorities are more likely to be Republican than less educated minorities. Whereas, whites with higher educations, there's depending on what kind of jobs and stuff like that. And so the thing is that, regionally, okay, so when it comes down to it, I am a white male from the South. Okay, so when, you know, raised by Republican parents. Now, that's another thing that Keith brought up, is that your parents are the single biggest influencers. I think about 2/3 of people, if they're raised by two parents that are part of the same political party, they will vote for that party. They will tend to support that party into adult life. And so when you look at that, it's like someone's demographics. You know, when people are like, oh, well, how can you vote for this person or this person? A lot of times you can just kind of take a step back and look at it. And you know what? Demographically, that makes sense. And so, for example, the New Deal coalition, now that's something that's kind of, you know, that dominated politics from the 30s to the 70s. And what happened there was, of course, you know, Southern whites bolted to the Republican Party between the 60s and the 80s. And then, you know, you take, for example, like Catholics. Catholics have been a traditional Democratic constituency. But then again, today, white Catholics tend to vote Republican, you know, because, you know, you've got, you know, some of the social issues, you know, pro-life, stuff like that. And then, of course, I think being Catholic is not as much of a decider. You know, it's like if somebody is Catholic today, they're not as self-conscious about that as they might have been, you know, 40 or 50 years ago. And especially, you know, 90 years ago, when you had the heyday of the Ku Klux Klan, people were very self-conscious about that, you know, which, African Americans are the most loyal to the Democratic Party. I mean, you've got typically about 9 out of 10 African American voters voting Democratic. Latino and Hispanic voters, you've got, you know, about 2/3 of those voters lately have voted Democratic. Now, of course, that is a little different with Cuban Americans, okay? Because Cuban Americans, you know, now there's been a little bit of a shift in Cuban Americans toward the Democratic Party recently, but, you know, historically, Cuban Americans have been a very Republican constituency, and I think the majority of Cuban Americans still vote Republican, but then again, that's because they escaped from a, you know, what they associate, you know, a left-wing regime, and they associate any kind of left-wing politics with Castro, so they tend to be more conservative than other, you know, other Latinos, Hispanics. And so as far as that goes, that is, those are some important things about demographics. Now, of course, as people get older, they tend to get a little more conservative and stuff like that. So, you know, demographics play a huge role in how somebody votes. You know, I mean, we think we've got a lot of freedom, which I guess we do, but really, you know, it's like that's a great thing to study to understand why people vote different than you. You know, it's like basically people vote based on their own experiences and their own background. And while there are exceptions, you know, largely demographics do, you know, have a lot to say about political behavior. All right, Keith, what have you got for us?
So we're going to give just a quick shot at the Budget and Impoundment Act. Cedric is just killing us asking about the Budget and Impoundment Act of 1974. So I'm going to go to the sweet spot, which is the big idea. This is one of the few examples that we have of a piece of legislation that was vetoed by the president and got that 2/3 majority in both the House and the Senate. So travel back with me, Cedric, to the year 1974. So we have President Nixon, who, you know, believes in kind of the, you know, the executive theory of government. He's the imperial president. He believes in executive power. I think that many people might be surprised to find that President Trump also is kind of executive centric. People have made that claim against Obama as well. But Nixon took it to the extreme. And before 1974, even though Congress would spend money through legislation, the president would sometimes impound that money, wouldn't spend that money. And it was $12 billion that Nixon wasn't spending in the early 1970s, claiming that, you know, we had a deficit and he couldn't spend that money. And Congress is stomping their feet saying, no, you have to spend that money. We spent that money. So basically, what the Congressional Budget and Impoundment Control Act does, it's a power grab. It's a power grab from Congress, from the executive, kind of taking what they see as their constitutional right to spend money. It did a couple things. It created 2 standing committees for the budget, one in the House and one in the Senate. It created the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, which does all the statistics and projections for what budgets will do to the economy. how much of a deficit and debt you are creating or a surplus in order to know before you vote what the effect of that is going to be. And it also severely limits the president's ability to impound funds, to not spend funds. So cut to the chase, Mr. Hughes. The Budget and Impoundment and Control Act of 1974 is Congress taking back some of their power, not unlike the War Powers Act in that same era, where Congress is basically reacting, using their power, checking the power of the presidency, taking some of it back, at least for a little while. What do you think, Tom? Keep going through a couple more
here.
What
I think is I want to thank Ava, Manor, Bridget, Joel, Abby, two Abbies, Edson, Anna, Nick, Kieran, Nicholas, Olivia, and Daniel for adding me on Snapchat. Tom Richey SC, much appreciated. I'll have information on tomorrow's hangout on there, as well as my other social media accounts. But I'm getting something here from my new friend, Sophia, one of my newest followers here. Sophia wants to know about the clauses of the 14th Amendment. It looks like AP for Students tweeted this not too long ago, which means probably won't be on the exam, but no, who knows? But anyway, as far as that goes, the amendment's first section, okay? So first of all, there's the citizenship clause. And the citizenship clause guarantees birthright citizenship to people who are born in the United States. Now, of course, if you're like a diplomat's kid or something like that, not so much. If you're subject to the laws thereof, but basically birthright citizenship. Privileges or immunities clause, okay? The privileges or immunities clause of the 14th Amendment is basically saying, now when it comes down to it, what I think about is when we think about the privileges and immunities of citizenship, the privileges, those are the things that I get to do, okay? So I get to vote, I get to speak freely, I can run for office. Now, immunities, these are things that can't happen to me. So immunities, it's like I'm immune from cruel and unusual punishments. I'm immune from excessive fines and bails. I'm immune from, all kinds of other stuff, illegal searches and seizures. So there are protections. So basically all Americans are entitled to the privileges or immunities of being citizens. Due process clause, that everybody, nobody can have anything taken away from them without due process of law. So basically everybody is a citizen, okay? And you can't deprive. Now this also says, nor shall any state, okay, deprive any person of life, liberty, or property. One of the most important things about the 14th Amendment is, as I noted earlier, while the Bill of Rights is about limiting the federal government, the 14th Amendment is about limiting the power of the state governments. Remember, the context here is these southern states after the Civil War passing the Black Codes, which were basically saying that, hey, you're not a slave anymore, but you're also not a citizen, and you're not getting all the privileges and immunities. And then finally, there is the Equal Protection Clause that says that everyone in the United States is guaranteed equal protection of laws, equal protection of laws. And so that's where, the 14th Amendment gets selectively incorporated by the court. Looks like Keith's got some good stuff here, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, and I'm going to go to a couple questions in a second. Hold on, Congress. I did want to show you, to solve some of those constitutional problems. I have every single stinking part of the Constitution, folks. So if you go to the video arsenal in the Constitution, Article 1, Article 2, Article 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all of your amendments. I'm going to give you some easy ways to remember some of those amendments, but this is less of U.S. history and you kind of memorizing and really doing more of an application, why the amendment came to be, what's the effect of the amendment. But you could see we go all through 27. That's the last amendment, which is going to hold off congressional raises until after they're reelected. But then we have the convention, pardon power, the Great Compromise, electoral college, elastic, all of it. It's all right here, folks. Even angry Donald Trump with the emolument clause. So you're going to want to hit that up sometime between today and tomorrow, and then that would be all good. So what I wanted to answer was a very specific question. Brando asked, can't Congress overturn a Supreme Court case? And the answer is no. You have to think of the Supreme Court as sort of the Like if they were NFL referees, right? Can a team overturn a referee's call? And the answer is no. Even if every fan in the stadium is screaming and booing at the refs, they can't. There's only one way to change a call on the field, and that's to change the rule book. So is there a check and balance on the Supreme Court? Well, there's a couple. I mean, number one, Tom mentioned this before, but no Supreme Court justices have ever been impeached, but they could be. So there is kind of that check and balance, but there's also changing the actual rule book. So if we don't like Citizens United, if you believe that, money shouldn't be equated with the same type of free speech of, say, a human being, then you could amend the Constitution, the 28th Amendment, to regulate campaign cash. You could do that. You could have an amendment to change the way that legislatures draw up those lines that we talk to eliminate gerrymandering. You could have a balanced budget amendment, but you don't. And in order to get that, it's not the Articles of Confederation. It's not impossible, but it's a mighty hard road to pull. So no, they can't do that because they are the referees. So I think that's really important. Some of the really quick amendments, just to get some under your belt. Like I usually divide the amendments into sections, and I'm going to go through some of them really fast as Tom preps for the next question. But get those suffrage amendments down because there's a whole bunch of them. I mean, not only do you have the 15th Amendment, which is going to expand suffrage to African-American males. You have the 19th Amendment, which is suffrage for women. You have the 23rd Amendment, which is suffrage for DC residents. The 24th Amendment, which eliminates poll taxes related to suffrage. And the 26th Amendment. I always remembered it. It's so stupid. I'd say 26, and I'd add the numbers. I'd go 2 + 6 is 8. Teen years old vote. Sometimes stupid things work, though. So find some ways to remember the amendments. I'll give you some of the stupidest ones I have. I've been dying to be stupid. Go through my Bill of Rights hand game. You got to know the stupid Bill of Rights. I'll play it with you really quick. I can do this in 3 minutes, Tom. So I always start by going, the Bill of Rights protects you from the federal government. How many amendments, children? There are 10. And then we use our fingers for most of them. So there are 5 freedoms in the First Amendment. 5 freedoms. 5, cinco, foom. Freedom of speech, religion, press, assembly, petition. We have a video on this. Second Amendment, bang, bang, the right to bear arms. 3 is a crowd. Get that soldier out of...
All right, and he will get back to that when he comes back.
Like that, speedy trial. You have your 7th Amendment civil trials. 8th, double nooses. I can't do this. There's too many. In order to remember some of the other ones, attach 18 and 21 together because those are the drinking ages most people know in American history. And even though it has nothing to do with drinking ages, it does have something to do with drinking. So you have your 18th Amendment, which is going to prohibit the sale and manufacture of alcohol, and the 21st Amendment, which is going to repeal that, go back to alcohol being, legal. You also have 22nd, if you say 2 enough, it's the 22-2-2, no more than 2 terms, which is an illustration of going from unwritten constitution, where presidents just followed that precedent that Washington set down, and they didn't serve more than 2 terms. But when FDR breaks that, that's a sign that we have a mechanism to change the Constitution, to write into the Constitution that you can't serve more than 2 terms. So it's a delicate system. It's a magical system. But make sure you understand how the amendment system works. I got cut off in my beat before. But 2/3 of both houses, 3/4 of all states. That's how, I believe, except for one, were passed. You can have state conventions and different mechanisms, but that's the one that's used most often. So know some of the amendments, know the basic process for amending the Constitution, have some really great examples. I get all of them. It's not impossible to know all of them, but at least some of the major ones on suffrage. And please, Tom was talking about the 14th Amendment before. Please watch the 14th Amendment video. There's so many ideas about federalism, selective incorporation, judicial review, and civil rights that you need to understand that amendment in order to apply it in those free responses. Really quickly, somebody asked me, how much do I have to write, Mr. Hughes? What if I only write 19 words? If those are the best 19 words to answer the question, yeah, I guess that's what you have to write. Now, if you have time, format, sure, do it. You can have an opening and introduce your idea, have a thesis, answer the questions, directly. But if you don't have a lot of time, there's nothing wrong with bulleting a list. If they want to know why the monkey climbed up the tree, what did he eat on top of the tree, how did he get down, and how people felt about the monkey climbing up the tree, eating and getting out, bullet them and answer them directly. But like we said before, there's no time for BS. You can't be all flowery and dance around the fire. They're going to know that you're a fire dancer. You need to jump in the fire, brothers and sisters. So dig out something, but don't leave it blank. Please find the connection somewhere, because that, 4 or 5 sentences that might get you the 1 point might be the difference between you getting college credit and you not getting college credit. Remember, this is graded kind of on a bell curve. So depending on how kids do this year, it might be, not the best grade that's going to get you the college credit. So do the best you can. I think you're all capable of 5s. I'll do a 4. And heavens forbid, maybe you fall to a 3. But you don't need to get a 2 if you spend enough time and you have some strategies to time yourself through that exam. Unlike any other AP exam, it's a little bit of a race to get through that multiple choice. So please have a strategy. I told my kids, if you know it, answer it. If you don't, put a 1 on it if you're going to come back to it, a 2 that you might never come back to it. And then at least you have a system, so when you're done, you might save 30 seconds, going right to those 1s and skipping the 2s. And then at the end of the day, if you have to guess, you shouldn't leave blanks. I don't believe you're penalized for leaving blanks. Tom, am I right? Did they change that?
Well, here's the thing, Keith.
Is
now,
it
of course, the old way. Yeah, the old way, they didn't technically penalize you either, but psychologically, some people couldn't handle it. So there is no guessing penalty. Now, the thing is, there are different ways to take a test. Keith and I disagree on this. I say answer all the questions in the order that they appear, because help is not on the way. Now, Keith's got good advice too. I mean, there are more than one way.
I would say, Tom, I would say still go through them in order. But I'm just saying that if you're spending too much time on one, maybe you should answer it. Maybe put a little mark next to it. And if you have time, when you're done with the free, go back to it if you can.
Okay, gotcha. Now, the thing is, I would just be careful about second guessing, because sometimes, like what I tell students about take any AP test is if you can't trust your instincts, you're going to fail anyway. Like there's no way like you're going to pass the test. And what I've seen happen to people is there may be a student that's going to make a 3, a 4, or 5, and they second guess themselves. Like they're just sitting there and they're just like, I can't trust myself. And if you can't trust yourself,
I'm saying if you have no instinct, sometimes kids have no instinct, but I agree with Tom. If you have a gut feeling, go with the gut feeling. It's like Oprah. If you get the gut feeling, someone's behind you, trust your instinct. So I agree with you, Tom.
Yeah. Now, what I would say, Keith, is if there's like 100%, like you're like, oh, you go back and you have a little bit extra time and you're like, I read that question wrong and I'm 100% sure that my first impulse was, then whatever. But I tell people generally, like, when you finish, put your pencil down, put your head down, rest your head for the free response. But, that's the thing. Do whatever works for you. Different things work for different people. Now, as far as that goes, my friend Celeste is asking, can I go over the different powers, enumerated and implied? Now, enumerated powers are in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. Now, these are things like borrow money, maintain an army and a navy, tax, coin money, interstate commerce, ratify treaties, all kinds of stuff like that. Now, also, there are implied powers. There's the elastic clause, otherwise known as the necessary and proper clause. So in Article 1, Section 8, after all the powers are there, it's like Congress can then do things that are necessary and proper to execute the foregoing powers. So, for example, that's where you get into the doctrine of implied powers. Now, that is loose construction. That's where Hamilton says, well, the government can coin money, can tax, can borrow money. A bank would be helpful. And so Hamilton's like, whoa, and Jefferson's like, whoa, Jefferson's like, look, a bank isn't necessary to do these things, okay? That the Constitution says necessary and proper, not just helpful and convenient. And so that is really separating a strict constructionist from a loose constructionist. And a strict constructionist would have a much more, much more of a distrust of the doctrine of implied powers, because a lot of times government can use this to continue to stretch out the Constitution. And if you stretch it out too much, it loses its meaning. And now one thing that I want to note here is when it comes to the presidency, whereas with Congress, it's implied powers, with the presidency, it's inherent powers. Okay, so the presidency uses a different term. Now, then I've got a question from Tia Margarita. She's kind of a big deal. People know her. I thought that I was somebody earlier today when I saw I finally hit 10,000 Twitter followers. Thank y'all who followed. But Tia Margarita's got like 45,000 Twitter followers, and she's into Star Wars, which Tia, hopefully you like the theme. And if you're taking a push, make sure, because we're going to have, whoa. There we go. There we go. Oh, ow. So anyway, got the whole Star Wars thing going on. Looking forward to finding out more about what you do and all that kind of stuff. But Tia is asking here. Let's see. She truly is confused. And what was her question? That can I go over the Civil Rights Acts? Okay, I would be glad to, Tia. I tell you what, I'm going to go ahead and retweet that because everybody else is following her. Why don't y'all? All right. So as far as that goes, the Civil Rights Acts, I've got this on one of my study guides for AP US history. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to kind of go over this. And, as far as that goes, let's see. Now, the Civil Rights Acts. Now, one thing I'm going to note, the Civil Rights Act of 1957. Okay, now it was updated in 1960. This is what I would call bark. Okay, that when it comes down to it, this was the Civil Rights Act of 1957 was basically about just getting a law passed. Okay, that was the first Civil Rights Act that was passed since Reconstruction. Now, the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This was the first bite Civil Rights Act. So 1957, updated 1960, really didn't do a lot. There were a lot of loopholes, all that kind of stuff. And, this was really something for Lyndon Johnson to bolster his upcoming presidential run. And Southern senators went along with it, or at least a lot of them did. Now, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, no discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. Banned public school and workplace segregation, and also segregation in public accommodations, meaning restaurants, hotels, yada, yada, which were going into now privately owned businesses. Now, they stopped short of housing. Okay, so that is 1968. Where finally the Fair Housing Act, which outlaws any discrimination when it comes to housing. Now, between 1964 and 1968, which deal with public accommodations and housing, you've got the Voting Rights Act of 1965, where the federal government, it says the federal government will basically give oversight in the states. Now, this has basically been gutted by the Supreme Court. In 2003, the Supreme Court gutted several provisions because they said basically that states that had a history of discrimination, they had a history of discrimination in areas that had a history of discrimination, the federal government would have to pre-clear any changes for their voting regulations. And so the Supreme Court said in 2013 that while that may have been fine at the time for the federal government to do, there had been no update of this. Okay, so if we look at the Voting Rights Act. Okay, so if we look at the Voting Rights Act here, let me kind of show you what it says here, that these were the states that are getting, that are getting pre-cleared. So when you look at this, now besides Virginia, you look at Arizona, Texas, Louisiana, you're looking at basically the Deep South, Arizona, Alaska, and Virginia. Now, besides Virginia, all of these states are reliable Republican states. So, you see that there is a bit of a political element here. And so the Supreme Court said that if you're going to do a new study and show which states had recent incidents, then that's fine. But under the current criteria, this is no longer operable. So, for example, what happened is when Indiana they passed a voter ID law, then this law went to court. Like, people challenged this law in court. The Supreme Court actually ended up upholding Indiana's voter ID law. But South Carolina, the state where I live, when South Carolina passed a voter ID law, then that had to be pre-cleared. In Washington, which was controlled at the time by Democrats. And so it wasn't pre-cleared. And so now, after this decision in 2013, Shelby County versus Holder, now the federal government, basically the provisions as they are now of the Voting Rights Act are inoperable. So as far as that goes, Tia, Margarita, Dale, Laura, whatever your name is, all right, maybe one of these days I'll find out. Whatever it is, hopefully that answered your question. Okay, just always interesting to find, students in high school with like just a ton of Twitter followers. Very impressive. Keith, what you got?
I'm going to have to follow this kid. I haven't been looking at my Twitter for a little while.
Yeah.
That is pretty impressive.
I tell you, maybe she should be doing a hangout, why
maybe. I'm not as, I know I'm hip Hughes, but I'm not as hip as some of these kids. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And certainly not Mr. Richey, a Snapchat. Look at you go, man. So what I want to talk about a little bit is just hit you with a couple cases. A couple people are asking specifically about free speech cases, but I've said this before, don't get caught up in a million cases. If you're going to take free speech, and we're going to, for instance, talk about two concepts. We have this concept of limiting rights and expanding rights. I mentioned this in the beginning of the video, guys, but if you can just categorize your court cases into court cases that garner strength for the federal government, federalism cases, and some of them also might take away power from the federal government, but that's different than these cases that deal with rights, that expand rights or restrict rights. So certainly freedom of speech cases are going to do one of those two things. They're either going to restrict or expand. So the easiest ones, and that's what we have to do at this point, is really to do Schenck and Texas versus Johnson. I think that's probably your easiest bet. I forget who asked this question. Someone asked about earmarks too. I'm getting tired. But what I would say is Schenck is the court case which limits civil rights, right? Schenck is a World War I socialist. He's a protester. He's handing out, stuff that's advocating that you don't, fight in the war and such. And the government says, no, you can't do that. That isn't freedom of speech. That's a clear and present danger with what the court agrees with, that speech isn't free because it's endangering the lives of other Americans. Now, Mr. Schenck would disagree with that, as would other people that are advocates of free speech. But that's a restrictive court case. That's going to limit our rights, as opposed to Texas versus Johnson. And I have videos on both of these court cases. But in Texas versus Johnson, we have a very, understandable idea that's controversial. That it's the Republican National Convention in Texas. It's 1980, and there are anarchists. There are people that are very angry. You need to know kind of the spectrum of anarchy to libertarianism and socialism and all that good stuff. But they're doing stuff that make people mad. They're burning the American flag. And they're saying that they're doing this as a political act, that the burning of the flag is their freedom of speech, that it's a symbolic freedom of speech kind of gig. And Texas arrests them and says, no, we have laws against that. That's not freedom of speech. You could be inciting violence. You could be a threat to national security, yada, yada, yada. And what the Supreme Court says is no. And I believe Scalia ruled for the freedom of speech. This shows you that ideology sometimes trumps politics.
You're
that
correct.
He is he's a purist in terms of being a strict interpretationalist. And he believes this is freedom of speech, and that the state doesn't have the right to take your liberty away for a benign reason, that they need a reason to do that. So you can do that with all of these court cases. And I encourage you to find some restrictive and expansive cases for privacy and for courts and lawyers and all the other amendments, but don't get caught up in memorizing every court case, but trying to nail things down to this basic idea of law and order. Liberty. That's really what we're talking about. A Hobbes and Locke sort of situation. Do you know that there's a video where Tom sings about this and such? And I'm going to do a shout out right now. If you're still watching, we're losing people, and I gotta go to bed soon, Tom. I'm being honest. I'm a tired old man. But Mr. Betts put a video out today. Tom, have you seen this video?
I haven't seen it yet.
American Rhapsody. It is perhaps the coolest video I have ever seen, where he imitates Bohemian Rhapsody doing a complete review of AP US history. And I get to headbang. I wish Tom was headbanging in it, because I have a feeling he could headbang better than I could headbang. So what I'm going to do right now is tweet that. So you have to follow me on Twitter. I'm not a huge, like, you got to do it, but you got to do it. So go to my Twitter at HipHughes. And when we're done with this, go watch American Rhapsody. So, Tom, I'm going to give you a chance to do maybe a couple more. I could do a couple more. But
all right. Now, as far as that, let's see. What I'm doing right now on Twitter, I am putting out some free promo codes for Romulus government. Okay, so I've got a couple for iOS out. I've got one for Android. I'm going to be tweeting a few more free promo codes. Like Keith said, we're about to call it a night, but I'm also going to be tweeting out free promo codes during tomorrow night's broadcast with Paul Sargent, which I will give all the details on social media tomorrow about where that's going to be aired. It'll be on my YouTube channel, Tom Richey. If you just put in my name, Tom Richey on the YouTube, go ahead and subscribe there. You'll see it. So, you know, I'm putting out those promo codes. I'm going to put out a few more tonight, and then we'll have some going tomorrow night as well. Okay. And so let's see. Look at this meme. All right. Oh my goodness. Yeah. So great. Okay. Somebody just sent me a meme. I'm so sorry. I mean, he wanted me to actually do something, and I'm just sitting here laughing at memes. All right. But yeah, it's a meme with me in that Kylo Ren mask. I'll tweet that. And so as far as that goes, ladies and gentlemen, let's see, we're going to retweet that. Okay, so Romulus government, ladies and gentlemen, remember that. And let's see what people are asking on Twitter. Okay, earmarks. Okay. Okay, so earmarks. Okay, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. So do I have one for Apple? Yes, Catherine, I've got, you know, I'm putting out codes for both iOS and Android. The app is on both platforms. Okay. So I will be tweeting out some more stuff here. Okay. I'll be tweeting out some more stuff, and we'll be getting on to that. Okay. So as far as that goes, let's see, we've got one for earmarks. Now, earmarks are basically like now there are a few things that people do. Now, first of all, there was one that I used the term constituent services the one time when I taught government, and it's really casework. Okay. Casework is when, like, Congress people are, you know, basically catering to individual constituents. Like, individual constituents have a complaint or they need a service. Casework. Now, another thing is, when you go to Washington, D.C., you can sign up for a standard Capitol tour, or you can get in touch with your congressman or your senator, and you can say, I'm one of your constituents, I would like a tour. Well, they're going to give you a tour. That's casework. Okay. Like, they want to cater to you individually. Now, earmarks, this is where, like, somebody decides, like, look, you know, I need some money for my district. Like, when we talk about, like, pork barrel spending and stuff like that, this is when, like, there is something that is being marked. It's like, okay, this is a special project in my district. Now, it's not really like a national project. It's just in my district, and that's earmarks. Okay. Now, there are subtle things about earmarks and pork barrel spending, but really, as far as a survey level exam like this, earmarks and pork barrel spending, you can put them in the same box together. This is when basically Congress people go over things on their, differences. Or, I mean, whatever I was saying. Okay, so Sebastian, the full faith and credit clause. Basically, you know, a law of one state is observed in other states. Okay, so for example, my South Carolina driver's license, you know, I can use that in other states. You know, full faith and credit, like such as a marriage that is performed in a state, would be in another state. So full faith and credit. Now, of course, there was the Defense of Marriage Act that was passed in the in the 1990s that I personally feel like was unconstitutional, because it said that states did not have to recognize same-sex marriages from other states. Whereas, the thing is, full faith and credit clause says that contracts from one state will be observed by other states. Okay. As far as claiming, you're just going the free promo codes I'm putting out. You go, I mean, look up the instructions on how to claim a promo code. Somebody's going to get the promo code. Okay. I'm going to put out a few more while Keith's talking. So I think Keith is ready. I'm going to put out some more promo codes for both iOS and Android.
So what I'm going to say, guys, and I'm going to remind you, number one, that I have to teach a class tomorrow night, but Tom is going to do this craziness again with Paul Sargent. So he's going to know which topics we didn't pick up on, what questions that he's going to spend a little bit more time on. So you want to make sure that you're ready for that tomorrow. Follow Tom Richey on Twitter. He tweets out his links, and you'll go to his website and all that thing. And make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channels and check us out. So it's not just a cram the night before. We're going to be there for you when you guys go to college. We have people tweet us and send messages all the time from graduate school and law school thanking us for these videos. So make sure that you don't forget about us after you win this exam. Believe that you can win. I don't want to be all inspirational and fluffy, but mindset's really important. I don't care what kind of year you had. I don't care what kind of teacher you had. You can swim to shore at this point. Just cram, be ready, finish those free responses, and do the best that you can. So we could talk forever. I could keep talking. I know Tom could keep talking, but I am going to say good night, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, goodbye. And remind you again, HipHughes.com, go to the stupid video arsenal, start going through the folders, find videos where you go, I didn't know what that was. And a lot of the videos are short, 3 minutes, 5 minutes. If you see one that's 20 minutes, you might not want to watch it. Although you might want to watch the one on federalism, which is 20 minutes, because we didn't go over enough of that, I think. So I could talk forever, but I'm going to stop right now. I'm going to give Tom a chance to say goodbye, and then I'll finish us off with one more goodbye. Mr. Richey.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. First of all, Hip Hughes, like what y'all may not know is like there were a few years that I was, you know, in AP exam week, I was watching Hip Hughes as a fan. And then it's like he helped me start a YouTube channel, like anytime like performing with this guy, broadcasting with this guy is really goals here. Okay. I mean, this guy has just been here for me. I remember when his channel got 5,000 subscribers and I was just like, wow. So, you know, just being able to work with this guy is a privilege and immunity, I guess. I'm going to put up a few more promo codes. Some of this other stuff we're going to save to tomorrow. We're going to be back tomorrow at 8 p.m. and it's going to be awesome. Paul Sargent's going to be here. And then tell your A-Push friends that Hip Hughes and I are going to be doing a night before A-Push review. And that's going to be on Thursday. So we're going to be back at it reviewing U.S. history, and it's going to be awesome. So y'all be ready to come back for tomorrow, and that's going to be great. It's going to be lit. At Tom Richey on Twitter and Instagram, Tom Richey SC on Snapchat. You know what? I might even put some promo codes on Snapchat. That would be kind of fun to snap some promo codes for the app. So, you know, but there aren't going to be too many promo codes for the app. So you might just want to spend $2.99 and buy it. But anyway, again, thank you for my friend, to my friend Hip Hughes. Where attention goes, energy flows. Y'all remember that. And, you know, this is in your hands, or life is in your hands, dude.
Hey, kids. Goodbye from Hip Hughes History and Tom Richey. And he stole my line because I say it at the end of every video I've ever done, because I believe with all my heart, where attention goes, energy flows. And we'll see you guys next time that you press our button.